If any of you have ever been assigned or willingly undertook the task of writing an essay, article, short story, novel, or any other long form of written content, you have probably at some point or another developed a minor to major case of writer's block. I'm sure you remember the feeling, the desperation felt when rummaging around in your mind, trying to find the right words to convey your point, whilst being taunted by a stagnant blinking cursor atop a white blank page. It tends to sneak up on you, writer's block, and in moderate to severe cases, most people go looking for ways to cure themselves via the internet. Yet, upon finding an article on how to unclog, overcome, or beat writer's block, you discover that the solution is not laid out neatly in a step-by-step process. No, instead, you are met with a series of subjective and contradicting words of supposed wisdom, none of which perform the quick fix you need. And so, humiliated and dejected, you walk away from the taunting blank page with the blinking cursor, opting to tackle them tomorrow when you're in better spirits. Whether you do or not is a toss-up. As you may be able to tell, I write from experience. Writer's block is probably one of the most demoralizing feelings a person could feel. It is unpredictable, it can last as long as it wants, and it has no clear fix. It is not like having an off day and dragging yourself through a shift. Rather, it stops you entirely and keeps you there until it decides to let you proceed. If it does. I have experienced a type of blockage recently. I wouldn't say it was writer's block in the sense of getting the words down. It was more of a creative blockage, a feeling of having the well of ideas dry up. A year ago, I thought I had enough ideas to last me until the end of time. But with every upload, I found that my creative horizons were narrowing instead of expanding. Ideas that had once seemed foolproof now seemed pointless, repetitive, or problematic, with the benefit of experience. And so, I treated this blockage like I would writer's block. I used the internet. Writer's block also accounts for an inability to generate new ideas, not just the wording of said ideas. So I thought, in a last-ditch effort, I would go back to the unclogging, overcoming, and beating articles I had consulted before to see if any solution could suit my needs. Some people suggested continuing to get words down. Other people contradicted this by suggesting I don't write at all. The consensus fluctuated between perseverance and idleness. You either had to write through it or give up entirely. I chose the former, but what to write about? Some said something you know, some said anything, some said dreams, some said gibberish. But, out of the multitude of things to write about, only one topic seemed to make sense to me, and that was found in a suggestion that said you could combat your writer's block by writing about writer's block. So that's what I decided to do. So, what is writer's block? Writer's block is a psychological non-medical condition in which a person is unable to write or even think about what they want to write. As the name suggests, the person experiences a blockage of the mind that stifles their ability to produce competent written work. Writer's block has likely affected humans ever since the first word was put to paper, stone, or any other substitute. The Romantics of the early 1800s believed that the symptoms of writer's block were a sign of a higher power preventing them from writing. Recorded symptoms of writer's block have cropped up in multiple sources throughout history. On October 22, 1804, a recently turned 32-year-old Samuel Taylor Coleridge alluded towards signs of writer's block when he wrote in his personal diary, "Yesterday was my birthday. So completely has a whole year passed, with scarcely the fruits of a month. O sorrow and shame, I have done nothing." Coleridge would later describe this decline in creative output as a poetic paralysis, which unfortunately for him, he suffered with for the remainder of his life. Later in the century, a writer by the name of Herman Melville published Moby Dick in 1851. Melville was notorious for fluctuating between stretches of productive writing and long periods of stagnation. Upon the release of Moby Dick, Melville didn't write for months and grew to hate the process of writing as he got older, eventually opting to quit altogether towards the end of his life. From the 1900s up until the present day, writers from all fields and levels of prestige have experienced writer's block ranging from moderate to severe to fatal. However, despite the condition being so universally acknowledged viscerally, the term writer's block wasn't invented until an Austrian psychiatrist and psychoanalyst by the name of Dr. Edmund Bergler coined the phrase in 1947. Bergler was fascinated by the creative inhibitions brought on by writer's block and studied writers suffering from it between the 1940s and 50s, eventually publishing his findings in his book, The Writer and Psychoanalysis. Bergler describes writers as people who unconsciously try to solve inner issues within themselves through the medium of writing. Bergler was a follower of Sigmund Freud, and his theories on the reasons why writers get writer's block echo this. Bergler believed writer's block to be a manifestation of psychic masochism, that being the unconscious wish to defeat one's conscious aims, and to enjoy that self-constructed defeat. The Freudian influence shows, as Bergler further explains his reasonings for the condition, as he equates these reasons for writer's block to the individual not receiving enough milk and nurturing from their mother as a child, and subconsciously wanting to block themselves to recreate that feeling. Since Bergler's invention of the term, and research into the psychological reasons behind it, the development in our acknowledgement and understanding of writer's block has further exposed the breadth of the issue when trying to determine its root cause. In the late 1970s and early 1980s, Yale University psychologists Jerome Singer and Michael Barrios recruited a variety of writers, some blocked, some not, and followed their progress for a month. All writers were interviewed during this time and asked to complete psychological tests. At the end of the month, what Barrios and Singer found was that all blocked writers were unhappy. The individuals with writer's block showed symptoms of anxiety and depression linked to perfectionism, self-doubt, procrastination, and obsessive-compulsive disorder. Today, these reasonings behind writer's block are generally understood to be the same. However, every individual is likely to differ from the next. Even greats of literature have suffered from debilitating bouts of writer's block, with some never fully recovering, and others developing techniques to combat it. Ernest Hemingway, Graham Greene, Leo Tolstoy, Virginia Woolf, Joan Didion, and Tom Wolfe are just a few examples of writers who produced great works and were still hit by writer's block at some stage of their careers. However, there is one man, alive today, who arguably suffers from the most severe and publicised case of writer's block we've ever seen. He is the king of writer's block, and his name is George R.R. Martin. George R.R. Martin is the writer behind the series A Song of Ice and Fire. Martin began writing the series in 1991 and had the first of a 7-book series published in 1996 called A Game of Thrones. 2 years following this, Martin released A Clash of Kings, and 2 years later, A Storm of Swords. Upon the release of A Game of Thrones, the sales were disappointing. However, as Martin continued to expand the story in the following 2 books, A Song of Ice and Fire skyrocketed in popularity, and this influx of fans eagerly awaited the 4th installment. Unfortunately, Martin was not producing at the speed he had been previously, as he was befuddled by an element of his story, which he referred to as the Milanese Knot. We would later find out this knot referred to Marine, a city where various storylines and characters were set to converge. Whilst Martin set about untangling this knot, which involved multiple rewrites placed in between long bouts of procrastination, an impatient fanbase grew more vocal about their want for the 4th installment. But finally, the knot was untangled, and A Feast for Crows was published in 2005. The reception was not too enthusiastic due to Martin's focus on certain characters and lack thereof for others. Martin responded to this criticism by promising the 5th book for the following year, as he had already practically written it. According to him, this book would contain the beloved characters missing in A Feast for Crows. A Dance with Dragons, the 5th installment of the series, was thus published in 2011, and like the book prior, wasn't hated, but didn't hold up against Martin's first 3 installments. Additionally, alongside the release of the book was the beginning of a TV series based on A Song of Ice and Fire called Game of Thrones, which aired its first episode on the 17th of April 2011. As I write this 12 years later, Martin is still currently writing the 6th installment of A Song of Ice and Fire and hasn't even begun the finale. He is 74 years old, and Game of Thrones has already concluded its series, with the last episode airing on May 19th, 2019. Due to Martin's inability to complete the last 2 books, the show had to tie up Martin's loose ends for him. Understandably, fans have given up believing the 6th installment, The Winds of Winter, is going to be released anytime soon. The possibility of Martin finishing the series within his own lifetime is looking slim. Martin is probably the most publicised case of writer's block we've ever seen, and I believe this never-ending bout of the condition is due to him being a victim of his own success. Martin has always been open about his struggles with writing, despite obviously being very good at it. Whilst being interviewed at a Comic-Con in 2013, the interviewer said to Martin, "You actually said once that you don't enjoy writing, you enjoy having written." Martin responded with this, "Yeah, which is not original again with me either. A lot of writers have said that, but writing is hard. I mean, I sit there and work at it. Boy, there are days where I get up and say, where the hell did my talent go? Look at this crap that I'm producing here. This is terrible. Look, I wrote this yesterday. I hate this, and I can see a scene in my head, and when I try to get it down in words on paper, the words are clunky, the scene is not coming across right, so frustrating, and there are days where it keeps flowing, open the floodgates, and there it is, pages and pages coming. Where the hell does this all come from? I don't know." As mentioned previously, a big contributor towards writer's block is unhappiness. This can be down to many factors: stress, self-doubt, perfectionism, anxiety, etc. It is more than likely that Martin's severe case of writer's block is linked to all these factors, and then some. It is no coincidence that the rise in popularity of A Song of Ice and Fire has coincided with the slowing output and quality of the product. Martin had set himself a monumental task when he started writing in 1991. Having so many characters and storylines to juggle mustn't be easy, but it must have been a lot easier when Martin was anonymous and didn't have millions of people waiting with high expectations. Throw on top of this an immediate kickback after 5 years of untangling a Meronese knot, and then after this, even more kickback from the following book that took even longer to be released after promising its release a year following the 5th installment. And then add on top of this a hit TV show that is reliant on you finishing the series, as year by year they slowly catch up to you. It is no wonder the man can't write. I don't see how you could think straight and make any concrete decisions, knowing these decisions will be at the scrutiny of millions of people who already have been on your case since the early 2000s. The problem for Martin is that he already obviously struggles with self-doubt, but that self-doubt has been amplified due to the monumental expectation that rests on his shoulders. I doubt the man could even choose what size lettering to use, let alone confidently balance these storylines and characters. Thus, Martin's case of writer's block stems from many factors a lot of us will never understand. As time goes on, fans are getting more impatient, and the larger the gap between 2011 and now, the higher the expectation grows, because surely a book that has been in the making for 12 years must be a masterpiece, right? Probably not. It is more likely that in this time, Martin has been desperately trying to untangle an even bigger knot than he has ever faced before, that being writer's block. So, how do you overcome writer's block? Well, like anything that involves treating the mind, the cure is often found for each individual through trial and error. Yet, to begin, we'll see how Burglar dealt with it. Burglar treated 36 patients during the 1940s and 50s and claimed he had cured all 36 of their writer's block. Burglar believed writers to be psychoanalysts and saw blocked writers as individuals who were blocked psychologically. Thus, the treatment Bergler used was therapy. Therapy isn't the worst option to take if you're trying to unblock yourself. As was further strengthened by Barrios and Singer, writer's block stems from being unhappy. However, despite therapy supposedly working in Bergler's case, sometimes a more specific and pragmatic approach is needed to unblock a writer. When looking for these answers, we shouldn't consult the psychologists and the psychoanalysts. Instead, we should consult the writers. Tom Wolfe, an American writer and journalist who wrote books like The Electric Kool-Aid Acid Test, The Right Stuff, and The Bonfire of the Vanities, experienced a paralyzing case of writer's block after being assigned to write a piece about car customizers based in Los Angeles for Esquire magazine. After 4 weeks of research, Wolfe sat down to write his piece and came up empty. The magnitude of the piece, alongside it being his first time writing for a magazine, stunted him completely. Unable to come up with anything, Wolfe told Esquire he was blocked. Esquire asked him to write down his research anyway so they could give it to someone else to write up, and Wolfe did just that. In one sitting, he wrote out everything he had found and handed it in to a man called Byron the following morning. He then went home and fell asleep. Around 4 PM on that same day, Wolfe got a call from Byron saying they're going to run his piece, just as he had written it, besides the Dear Byron at the top. What Wolfe learned from this story was to only focus on the writing during the writing process. Do not worry about the people who will see it or the things that need editing. Instead, to keep writer's block at bay, Wolfe believed that you had to block out all other thoughts and allow the other components to come into play once the write-up is completed. Another writer who suffered from bouts of writer's block was Ernest Hemingway. Hemingway had strategies for fending off writer's block whilst in the process of writing a novel. Hemingway believed in writing to a strict daily word count and stopping while you're ahead. He would also write first thing in the morning. By sticking to a strict word count, Hemingway was able to stop himself when everything's going well, and in doing so, he would allow his subconscious to work on the following day's story developments whilst doing other things. Always stop while you are going good, and don't think about it or worry about it until you start to write the next day. That way your subconscious will work on it all the time, but if you think about it consciously or worry about it, you will kill it, and your brain will be tired before you start. Graham Greene, a British author who produced multiple novels during his lifetime, would combat writer's block by writing in a dream journal. Greene was like Hemingway in that he also stuck to a word count and allowed his subconscious to figure out the following day's developments. Some writers deny the existence of writer's block, others are ruined by it. At the end of the day, a majority of the components related to writer's block are subjective. Naturally, there are a lot of ways to break from writer's block if you are suffering. Some people suggest reading, some deny its existence, some believe it can be willed through, and others go try to solve a deeper psychological issue. Sometimes, extremely odd measures have to be taken, and if you are someone who is willing to try anything, look no further for a solution than Joanne Didion, who would simply get the manuscript she has agonized over, place it inside a Ziploc bag, and stick it in a freezer. And so, in conclude... No. What we have learnt from... Not that. In my findings, the cure to... Hold on. Fuck's sake. Right, fuck it. Writing is hard.